This video is sponsored by Describe. Let's talk about alignment. It may not seem that way these days, but across the lifespan of D&D, alignment is probably the most heavily debated subject in the game. Before the Edition Wars, before safety tools, before the Matt Mercer effect, there was alignment. I'm not going to debate the original intention behind the design of alignment. There's a great Matt Colville video about that, and I'd just be stealing what he said. Go watch that instead, it's great. Instead, I want to talk about how alignment functions at our D&D tables. Not from a theoretical perspective, but from a practical standpoint. If you don't know, alignment is basically a Brady Bunch-style grid of a spectrum of law, chaos, good, evil, and neutrality. And every D&D character falls somewhere on that spectrum. In the top left corner, lawful good, bottom right, chaotic evil, central column in descending order, neutral good, true neutral, and neutral evil, and so on. Fun fact, the characters of the Brady Bunch line up exactly with their placement on the alignment spectrum. I wrote that joke without looking at the grid and before making the graphic, and honestly I've only seen like 4 episodes of the Brady Bunch 20 years ago, but I stand by it, it's true. But here's the important thing to note about alignment. It's descriptive, not prescriptive. Which is to say, your behavior should dictate your alignment, rather than conforming your behavior strictly to your alignment. It helps that, starting with 5th edition, alignment was no longer the only section of your character sheet that can act as an indicator of what your PC believes in. 5e provides fields for your personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws, all of which are probably much easier to help you get your head around your character's personality, because they are much closer to how we think about people, and honestly, how we think about relativistic morality in the real world. But that's not to say alignment has been dropped in favor of these. The options for ideals presented in each pre-written background also include a suggestion for one aspect of your alignment, something that would line up with that ideal. For example, looking at the Acolyte background, if you chose the ideal tradition, it recommends your character is probably lawful in some way. If you chose charity, it recommends alignment, maybe some version of good. For either of those, you might choose lawful good if that feels right for your character, but you could also decide to be lawful neutral or chaotic good respectively. Or you might choose to ignore those suggestions entirely and decide your character is, for example, chaotic neutral. Because alignment is not the be-all, end-all of your characterization. It's not the complete picture. One of the most common forms of the alignment debate is, your character wouldn't do that, it goes against your alignment. And whenever that happens, just remember, you can change your alignment. It's not a big deal. That's not to say that alignment can't matter. There are devils and demons and angels and modrons and slotty that essentially represent pure, distilled alignment examples. But for mortals, part of what I find interesting about alignment is that your alignment can change. Whether we think about it as your philosophy or just your character's priorities, in either case, it can change. In fact, I believe any story that has devils and angels in it requires the possibility that your alignment can change. Otherwise, there's not as much inherent tension in those creatures existing in the world. What does it matter if a devil tries to tempt you to do something evil if you literally can't change your approach to the world? Sure, a devil could trick you into doing something unambiguously evil, but I find that so much less interesting than the idea of temptation and corruption. One of the most popular ways alignment is used in online discourse is to show a grid of fictional characters and assign each of them an alignment. And in Matt Colville's videos on alignment, he specifically points out that this is flawed because very few fictional characters have alignments. But I don't think that's quite accurate. Or rather, I don't think that's the whole shape of the problem. After all, alignment is easy enough to assign to characters. We might debate some of these, but it's easy to find behavior that connects these characters to a D&D alignment. And that can actually be useful for new players who are trying to get their heads around the concept of alignment. But using characters from media is flawed because, usually, these characters have arcs. Han Solo starts chaotic neutral, I think that's fair to say. But he's probably neutral good by the beginning of Return of the Jedi. Maybe even lawful good. Chaotic doesn't just mean does random stuff, at least as far as I'm concerned. It means believing in the virtue of the absence of laws. And as far as I'm concerned, anybody dating a princess and co-leading a rebellion against an empire isn't that chaotic anymore. Han might not care who ultimately rules the galaxy as long as his friends are safe, but I'd argue not caring doesn't make him chaotic. It literally makes him neutral on the subject. Now, I don't believe alignment should be changed as a punishment, but that is more of a communication issue. We will talk about that in a future episode of Critical Role Demystified, but for now, just know, I don't believe a DM should unilaterally change a player's alignment. Well, a player character's alignment. But if you don't feel someone's behavior matches their alignment, you can say something like, what your character did doesn't seem to line up with what you wrote for their alignment. Do you think that alignment is still an accurate description? Of course, anytime you ask a question like that, remember my rule. Don't ask a question if you're not ready to receive any answer. Which brings me to another question. Why are you asking about their alignment? I'm not saying you can't, you're the dungeon master. Asking a question about their alignment is totally fine. But think about why you're asking. Are you just trying to understand what's going on in their head and their character's head? So that way you can better run a game that aligns, no pun intended, with their expectations? Are you trying to make sure they take the game world seriously and treat their actions with the proper weight? Or are you trying to police their behavior and make them conform to your expectations of what their alignment looks like? One of the biggest issues with alignment isn't just whether or not you use it to police whether your players are using alignment correctly. That's just one larger symptom of not being on the same page as your players about alignment. Why are you asking about alignment? I'm not trying to tell you alignment shouldn't matter in your games, that is not my point. But alignment should be something your players have control over. You can make suggestions, ask leading questions, and try to guide them to think more deeply about why exactly they chose the 2 words they wrote on their character sheet. But alignment is a bit of a Rorschach test. Every player brings their own perspective on law, chaos, good, evil, and neutrality. Just because you don't have the exact same interpretation doesn't mean they're playing the game wrong. Alignment can be flexible. I don't think it's controversial to say that in the real world, if someone kills another living, sentient creature running around in the world out of anything but self-defense, that's an awful thing to do. And yet we don't bat an eye when lawful good creatures butcher countless sentient beings in D&D. And you don't have to feel any differently about that, but that's why alignment is great for getting inside your players' heads. It wasn't that long ago in the history of D&D that it was commonly accepted that a lawful good character could conceivably keep their conscience clean while still butchering goblin babies, because all goblins are evil, so doing so was in fact an act of good. But that also gets into the topic about alignment for monsters, and we'll talk about that in Thursday's video. Yes, we will. And now, a word from our sponsor. Welcome to Great Moments in D&D History, presented by Artemis Gleam. Episode 3, The Tolkien Lawsuit. The very first edition of the game Dungeons & Dragons included hobbits, ents, and balrogs, because players would want to play Lord of the Rings-style adventures, and DMs would have had minis from Lord of the Rings war games. But then the Tolkien estate stepped in and reminded TSR Inc. that trademarks exist. So while orcs and wraiths and goblins and dragons could stay, those 3 creatures legally had to be renamed to halflings, treants, and baelors respectively. Of course, Gary Gygax and his colleagues could have saved themselves a ton of headaches and legal fees if they had changed the names before publishing their books, which they could have done if they'd signed up for today's sponsor, Describe. The fine folks at Describe provide pre-written text that you can use at your tables to describe monsters, magic items, spells, locations, and characters, and they're very adept at adapting copyrighted materials without violating trademark law. They can't legally write about Sladi, Beholders, and Mind Flayers, but they can write descriptions of fiendish toads, aberrant watchers, and psionic devourers, which, let's be honest, are excellent monster names, and the descriptions of these monsters can help create an atmosphere of dread at your table. If you visit describe.com/supergeek and use the promo code supergeek at checkout, you can save 10% off of your first subscription payments. Thus ends our 3rd episode of Great Moments in D&D History, presented by Artemis Gleam. Once again, that's dscryb.com/supergeek and use the promo code supergeek, which is what Gary Gygax should have done instead of waiting for the results of a lawsuit to force him to be creative. Now, if you do feel like alignment doesn't matter in D&D, that probably has a lot to do with your preferred storytelling style. There are plenty of compelling stories you can tell where alignment does not matter. If you play a game where moral, philosophical, or psychological questions come up, then alignment is, or can be, a wonderful tool. If you look at a movie like The Dark Knight, alignment matters in that film. Everybody has a different opinion on how far is too far for the greater good, what an individual's obligations are to the world, and the role of the self in society. But you could even argue that multiple characters have different definitions of lawful good in that film, and what that definition means to each of them is what creates the interesting tensions between them. But in most blockbuster movies, alignment doesn't matter, because filmmakers are, hopefully, very good at making the stakes so dire that any audience member can understand why the hero is doing what they're doing. Does it really matter what John McClane's alignment is at Die Hard? No, because the filmmakers put him in a situation where they wanted every audience member to understand why he's doing what he's doing, because everyone would do the same thing. He could be lawful good or chaotic evil, and I would argue that if his wife was captured and he was trapped alone in the building, he'd behave very much the same way, because his struggle is about saving his wife and salvaging his marriage, and the story has nothing to do with his personal philosophy. Even in the Lord of the Rings films, alignment maybe matters to just a few characters. I would argue it plays a role in the stories of Boromir, Faramir, Éowyn, Arwen, and Gollum. For everyone else, the filmmakers have made the decision very clear. It doesn't really matter what Aragorn's alignment is, because no rational person would argue that he shouldn't help fight at Helm's Deep, for example. Legolas and Gimli kill orcs because the film is about killing orcs, not because they're morally compelled to do it. In the films, Aragorn's only moment of alignment really mattering comes when he lets Frodo go with the ring. And not because he isn't tempted, but because he has to decide whether he can continue to follow his oath to travel with Frodo, or allow Frodo to leave the Fellowship. That's where his alignment actually matters. If you want your stories to be ethically and psychologically complex, then alignment is a useful tool. But if that's not the story that you and everyone else at the table want to tell, then you don't have to worry too much about it. On Thursday, we are going to come back and talk about alignment for monsters, but in the meantime, here's a discussion question. What are your feelings about alignment? How do you use it at your tables? I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to support the channel, there are a few ways you can do that. You can subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about new videos when they come out on Mondays and Thursdays. You can support my Patreon. Any dollar amount really helps the channel. You can join my Discord server and be a part of a cool community of folks who share their thoughts about D&D and RPGs and actual play. And you can sign up for my newsletter to get updates about what I've got going on. Until next time, play fair and have fun.